Well, here we are. There's my friend, Robert Spencer, back again. Robert, I always bring you on board when something comes up that really picks my fancy or my interest, or something that you have done. And one of the things that I love about you, Robert, is you always have the pulse of Islam. You have the pulse of what's happening around the world on Islam. You're a real prophet for our day. And I've always enjoyed talking with you. I've always enjoyed picking your mind because you've got such an amazing mind. I don't know anybody that has the wealth and the breadth of understanding of Islam, especially modern Islam and what's happening currently. And a number of, well, just 5 days ago on the 1st of September, you wrote an article in Jihad Watch on this football player. You call him soccer player here in the United States, football player called Neymar. Neymar is a household name in Brazil, one of the best football players in the world today, who played for Barcelona in Spain for many years, and then was headhunted by PSG in Paris, Paris Saint-Germain, there in Paris, in France, for a number of years, and now just recently has been headhunted for hundreds of millions of dollars, one of the highest prices ever given, ever paid anywhere for any football player, way above and beyond any other club, to go to Saudi Arabia, to go to Riyadh, to join the Hilal Club. In fact, this is exactly what happened on August the 18th. On August the 18th, he flew to join his club there in Saudi Arabia, an occasion that should have been enormous, and it was enormous, as happened when he landed there in Riyadh, there in Saudi Arabia. There were crowds to meet him, which is not abnormal. That wasn't anything out of the ordinary. And he walked out, and he was greeted by all the officials and many dignitaries, which is also normal. That's not out of the ordinary. But something happened, and it was not really something happened, but something he wore. He was wearing something that proved to be highly offensive to most of the Muslims in the world today. And that was the news. That was the news. It actually took over the news. And you wrote about this just a number of days ago. And I want to bring you on. I want to talk to you about this, Robert, because to me, there's a number of things that come out from what has happened. So help me with the story. You picked it up. You saw something going on here. And we're going to unpack it in a number of different ways. But first and foremost, explain what was the offensive thing and was it he did, seemingly innocuous. The thing that he was doing was actually wearing something. What was going on here? Hold on, help us out with this.
Jay, he was wearing a big cross. And of course, this is offensive to Muslims on a number of levels. But primarily, it's because in the Quran, it says that Jesus was not killed or crucified, but it appeared so to the Jews who said, we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary. And the Hadith contain a story of Muhammad depicted as saying that Jesus will return at the end of the world on the day of judgment and break the cross, as well as kill the pigs and abolish the jizya. And these are all indications that the dhimma, the contract of protection between the people of the book, primarily Jews and Christians, and the Muslims to whom they are submitting, will be ended, and everybody will have to either become Muslim or be killed. Mm-hmm. And so the breaking of the cross is an indication of the destruction of what is supposedly the false religion of Christianity, and the restoration by Jesus himself as a prophet of Islam of the true teachings that he came to bring to the world that the Christians have supposedly distorted. So the cross is offensive to Islam in general, whether or not any given Muslim is offended by it. What's more, Saudi Arabia itself has for years been notorious for being particularly stringent against any public display of a non-Muslim religion. And even though Mohammed bin Salman, and I know we'll talk about this a great deal more, but Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince and the de facto ruler of the country, is now embarked on a large-scale modernization trying to take Saudi Arabia off the oil economy and make it an attractive place for investment for the world in different ways so that it will survive what everyone expects to be the transition away from oil. Saudi Arabia has not shown any sign, at least as of yet, of being more hospitable to non-Muslim religions than it was before. And so if Neymar had been anybody else, if he had been Jose from the Philippines coming to work in Saudi Arabia, and I say that because obviously, as you know, there are many, many Filipinos who do go to work in Saudi Arabia, and many are very serious Christians, and many might indeed want to show up wearing a cross, but they likely know, and if any of them don't know, then they'll be immediately arrested when they get to the airport in Riyadh and told to take off the cross, but taking off the cross might not even be enough. If they find enough religious literature or Bibles, prayer books, whatever else in their luggage, then they might be subject to imprisonment or deportation.
So these are not just things you're saying off the top, and these have actually happened. These are things that we know about. This is a real problem with Saudi Arabia because it is the protector of the two holy places, Mecca and Medina, where the Prophet was born and also where the Prophet died and where the Kaaba is. And it's also the center of Islam. It's where all people pray to. So it has...
I'm sorry. Yeah, just was thinking in that connection, we should mention that there are also hadiths in which Muhammad on his deathbed is depicted as saying, let there be no Jews or Christians no two religions on the Arabian Peninsula, and I will drive all the Jews and Christians out of Arabia, and so on. And so that is the basis for Saudi Arabia's inhospitality, in hostility to other religions, that Muhammad himself is supposed to have said that no other religion should be there. And so it's a sign of the purity of the place, the wholehearted Islam of the place, that there are no Jews and Christians there, or if there are, they don't dare to show themselves to be Jews and Christians in any public manner.
All right, and I've got here Sahih Muslim, book 19, number 4366, which says much the same thing. I will expel, this is Muhammad speaking, I will expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and will not leave any but Muslim. So the intention is, if you come to Saudi Arabia, you either come as a Muslim or you convert very quickly. You will become a Muslim. There is not to be any but Muslims in this peninsula. So that is very clear. And that has been, in fact, that came up in one of the criticisms. And what's interesting, the criticisms that are coming up since August the 18th are not from within Saudi Arabia itself. They're coming from without. And you brought this up in your article very well. I'm just going to refer to, well, you have four. You have a Moroccan Islamicist named Abdullah Nahri. You have also an Algerian cleric named Musa Azumi, a Turkey-based YouTuber named Samir Al-Ahmad, and a London-based writer and translator named Mohammed Al-Ubaidi. None of these are Saudi Arabian. They're all from outside, but they represent almost 1.8 billion or almost 2 billion Muslims. And it is they who are upset, not Saudi Arabians. We're going to get into that. I'm going to talk about that. But these writers, this is what they're saying. And I'm just quoting your article here. I have it in front of me. You have Abdullah Nari saying two religions do not coexist in the Arabian Peninsula, referring to what you just mentioned to. Truly, the pagans are unclean. We are unclean, he says. So let them not, after their years of theirs, approach the sacred mosque. That's from chapter 9, verse 28 of the Quran itself. Those of us who are not Muslims are unclean. I want to talk about that a little bit. And then he goes on to say, expands, asserting that Allah has designated the Arabian Peninsula as a land of Islam and monotheism, trying to alter the purpose of that land from the worship of God to a land of entertainment. Soccer is entertainment, football is entertainment, is a dangerous matter. And he said he could have come, he being Neymar, could have come like the other players who were presented to the public without bearing, God forbid, the Trinity emblem. He got a little confused on that. The cross is not the Trinity emblem on the land of monotheism, but the emblem contradicts, as you mentioned very clearly, that as Christ was not killed. That's chapter 4, verse 157 of the Quran, that says very clearly, for they killed him not, they thought it was so. Another apostle was given his image, or crucified, but rather God raised him to himself. So that is the criticism this is interesting. It's cutting from outside, not from within. What's going on here?
Well, you have hardliners all over the world, and these four that you mentioned represent those hardliners who take very seriously the Quran passages that you quoted, the Hadith passage that you quoted, and they believe that Arabia is, as I said, the land of the pure Muslims, pure Islam. And so you don't have it sullied by the uncleanliness of the unbelievers. And that means that for this soccer player to arrive with a cross is a deliberate insult to Islam. It's not just that he's expressing something that they disagree with, but it is actually an affront to Islam, because Islam explicitly rules out the crucifixion and considers it an insult to Allah. It's a staple of Islamic apologetics that Jesus could not have been crucified, not just was not, but could not have been crucified, because Allah would not let his prophets suffer loss. Now, they are not consistent thinkers, and so they don't square that with the fact that they also criticized the Jews for being the killers of the prophets. Well, how could they have killed the prophets if Allah does not allow his prophets to suffer defeat? If they killed the prophets, then they could theoretically have crucified Jesus. But nonetheless, these propositions all coexist in their flagrant contradiction with one another. And so as far as Jesus is concerned, he could not have been crucified, and it's an insult to Allah to say that he was. And so Neymar, by showing up with a cross, is insulting all the Muslims in the world and Allah himself.
This London-based writer, Muhammad al-Bobaidi, goes and says much what you're saying. He says that those who disagree with our opprobrium against Neymar are just naive. Neymar's action sends a message of provocation, is what he says, to the conservative Islamic community. He is essentially saying, my wealth and my ties to power are stronger than your religion or your customs or your traditions. In other words, he's thumbing his nose at the Muslim world, is the way he interpreted that. It was not just a simple cross. Here's a picture of it. We showed it already. It's a diamond encrusted cross. It's a very expensive. It's only about this big, and it just sits right here on his chest. But it's obvious to anybody who sees him. It's the first thing your eyes look at, because it's glinting, it's beautiful, and of course it's scintillating. And it all the more is not only an expression of his faith, but also of his wealth and his power. And whether Neymar did intend this or not, it's being taken as a thumb your nose at us, which gets under the skins of Muslims immediately, but especially Saudi Arabians. I mean, it's fascinating. You quote this in your paper. Truly, the pagans are unclean, quoting from chapter 9, verse 28. We know that. That's something that we have had to confront Muslims on. The fact that we are unclean, the fact that we expand on that, Robert, where is this idea? I mean, we in Christianity, we don't have this view anywhere that those who are not of our faith, or those who are not our unbelievers, are unclean or beneath us, or somehow are second class, or in some way must be looked down upon. But this comes out very clear in Islam, and especially with Saudi Arabia and Arabians, vis-a-vis even other Muslims, but especially those who are pagans. That would include us as well.
Yes. Well, as you noted, Jay, it's in the Quran, chapter 9, verse 28. That explicitly the unbelievers are unclean, so do not let them approach the sacred mosque. As you noted, one of the clerics invokes that verse to justify his anger at Neymar, because he's entering the land of the sacred mosque and he's unclean as an unbeliever, and he's wearing a veritable sign of his uncleanliness. But the Quran is very clear in several passages that unbelief is not just a matter of the mind. or of rejection of various propositional truths. It is something ontological that transforms the unbeliever into something that is explicitly vile, as the Quran says in chapter 98, verse 6, the unbelievers among the people of the book, that is, the Jews and Christians who don't become Muslims, are the most vile of created beings. Now, that is an indication that unbelief does something to one in the Islamic view. And also chapter 8, verse 55, where Allah says that the unbelievers are like animals, and there's no more vile animal in his sight than the ungrateful unbeliever. This is a matter of what you are as an individual, that unbelief deforms one's very human status and makes you an animal. And so if you're, we wouldn't want a cow or a pig to walk into the church, and in the same way, they don't want an unbeliever in Arabia, because Arabia is the land that is most purely Muslim.
Fascinating.
Where everyone is a monotheist. And of course, in the Islamic view, virtually everyone, even the other people who think they're monotheists, are actually polytheists. The Christians for the Trinity, the Jews for saying Ezra is the Son of God, which no Jew has ever actually said, but it's in the Quran.
This is fascinating what you bring up. This almost ethnic, or it's not ethnic, because Islam represents many ethnic groups, but this idea of we are racially superior, we are intrinsically superior by nature because we are Muslims, can be found in many aspects of life. We've noticed this there in Britain with all these sex gangs, 20,000 white girls that have been raped by almost exclusively Pakistani Muslims over the last 20 years, all over northern England, in many of the major cities. And yet when they go to trial, their viewpoint is, well, these girls they're our chattel, all women are chattel who are not Muslim. Not Muslim women. They never touched Muslim women. They only touched English girls and white girls, not even Indians or Hindus. They only touched white girls. And this came out very clear in the court case, that they are superior. They come as guests, but they assume that they are hosts. And you can see this in a much more tertiary way with, we saw this in Britain, how they would come into schools and just demand at universities, the prayer rooms. It was almost like default. And when the prayer rooms are erected, it is their prayer room. It is not for anybody else. We saw this in Hong Kong. The same thing was repeated. There is this view by Muslims all over the world that they are superior by default because they are God's own, and all the rest of the world is to be looked down upon. What more so than, as you're saying here, that this would be the case in Saudi Arabia? Do you want to speak to that effect, or have you come across that in your work with other Muslims?
Oh, many times, yeah. Well, I can tell you more in general to start with that Maududi, of course, the famous 20th century Islamic scholar of the Quran, and political leader in Pakistan, he wrote an article that I thought was absolutely fascinating, where he speaks about being in some non-Muslim country. I forget which, and I'm not even sure he names it, but he says he walked into a cafe and he saw someone there, and he greeted him with Assalamu alaikum, which is, of course, the greeting that only a Muslim should give to another Muslim, not to a non-Muslim. And the fellow at the cafe says, "How did you know I was a Muslim?" And he said it was from the air of superiority that you emanate, that emanates from you. The idea, the way, the haughty way that you were sitting and regarding the rest of the people here. And I could tell that you have the understanding of your superiority as a Muslim. And this was something that Maududi was completely unapologetic about. He understood it as being a simple fact, a fact of reality based on the devaluation of unbelievers as per the Quran. And so I can tell you a personal story from years ago uh, in a church that I used to belong to, actually was kicked out of for drawing Muhammad. You had to love Muhammad to be in this church, but I didn't know that for quite a while. And anyway, uh, the pastor at one point got hold of the names of people who had bought houses in the area. And he and I put together a pamphlet welcoming people to the church and explaining what the church was all about and inviting them to come as they were new to the area. And we would send them to everybody who bought a house in the area. And one day he got a furious phone call from a man with a very thick Arabic accent telling him, "You have no right to send this to me. You have no right. I am a Muslim." And he said, "Well, great. We hope you'll become a Christian and come to our church." And he said, "You have no right to do this. This is not permitted to you." And we realized that he was working from his mindset from whatever country he had come from and assuming that it carried over to the United States. Because in his country of origin, the Christians would never have dared to invite him to the church. That would have been the occasion for a mob to come and maybe burn down the church or throw rocks through its windows or any number of other things, because the Christians are forbidden on pain of the revocation of the contract of protection, which is, of course, not officially enforced, but is de facto a part of life and is taken for granted often in Islamic cultures to this day. And they would consider that the Christians have transgressed against the agreement, and thus their lives are forfeit, and they could be physically attacked for such a thing. So he had an innate sense that the Muslims are superior, they cannot be proselytized to, this is not allowed for the subject peoples, and he brought that to the United States with him.
Well, this has been exciting. I want to now really end off this segment, this episode, by looking at the contrast. We don't treat people this way. A good example of what you just said, what you did in your own church. Christianity does not start from this premise. In the Bible, it's very clear that we are to be servants to our uh, our fellows, not just Christians, but to everybody. And the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Christ washed the feet of the disciples to make that point, to bring it home. We do that in our church. It's part of our symbol. The idea of servanthood, the idea of that we are there to help you, to bring to in any need. We have seen examples of this for 2,000 years, where Christians have welcomed people into their countries, welcome them into their lands. We allow them to, they can wear whatever they want to, where they can also create and put up their churches wherever they want to. We don't have a restriction against any other religion practicing their religion in any place with any people. And so this is such a contrast in Christianity. And I want to end, if you could just kind of bring this whole segment to a conclusion. Let's look at Christianity vis-a-vis what we've seen about Islam. Someone coming to play soccer here in United States or in Europe or any other we would claim to be Christian countries as far as Christian memory. We do have a Judeo-Christian environment and ethos. We would never get upset by them wearing whatever they wanted to wear or saying whatever they wanted to say. There's something different about the way Jesus approached this than the way Muhammad's saying there is not to be anybody but Muslims in the Arabian Peninsula. That you don't see on the lips of Jesus. Why is that? What's going on here? And what do you think is the difference between what we have in Christianity on this point of welcoming versus Islam?
You know, Jay, I think this is one of the deepest, most fundamental differences between Christianity and Islam. That you have in the New Testament the statement, God desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. Now, of course, Islam would say also that it's a universal message, but as long as you stand outside it, then you are the most vile of created beings, as we discussed before. Whereas in the New Testament, in the Apostle St. John says that the Lord died not for our sins only, but for the sins of the whole world, that his sacrifice is for everyone. It is offered to everyone. Whether everyone accepts it or not is a separate matter, but the value of every human being is very explicitly affirmed by the sacrifice of the Son of God himself for the sins of the whole world. Whereas in Islam, if you don't get on board with this, then you don't have even basic human dignity. You're not even a human being anymore. You're an animal, an unclean animal.
Yeah.
And that actually is reflected in Islamic law. We should note before we close that in Islamic law, in the law of retribution and indemnity, in the case of an accidental death of a human being, you actually can pay, instead of going to prison or whatever, you pay the family of the victim. And if you have killed a male Muslim, you pay more than if you have killed, for example, a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu. And there's actually a sliding scale of amounts that you pay in Islamic law that goes less and less and less depending on the lowered value of the victim.
Mm, mm. Robert, this has been terrific. Thanks. Listen, thanks so much for writing what you do. Thanks for keeping the pulse of Islam and warning us, but also exposing this religion to us as it comes in contact with us. We're going to end this episode here. It's so good to be able to end with the gospel to show what a contrast we have in Jesus Christ. We don't have to look down on anybody. We don't need to look down on anybody, but we do want people to come home. And on those who are listening, and if you are a Muslim listening, have you listened to what Robert's saying? Which would you rather be a part of? Would you want to continue as a Muslim with this sense of superiority, this idea that you don't want anything to do with others who defile you, or do you want to come to Jesus Christ, who says there's no difference between man or woman, Jew or Greek, slave or free? That means pretty much everybody is equal in Jesus Christ. We're all the same in Jesus Christ. I think I would rather choose the latter. I'd rather go with that. And on that note, this is Jay here in my new house, and there is Robert in his office. Over and out.